And we should be live. So, hi everybody. Welcome to Conscientious Omnivore. Today we are going to be having a live debate. I'm going to go real quick and just check in the chat to make sure that everybody can hear us. Let's see. Got 5 people waiting. Just want to make sure, can everybody hear okay? Just give it 1 second. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. If anybody, has trouble hearing later on, just like write into the chat to me, and then, I can adjust it if needed. So, okay. So anyway, we can get started. Thanks everybody for joining. Today is going to be a live debate between myself and Thomas Baden-Riess. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
That's correct. Yes. Thank you.
All right. Cool. And Logan Blake. So I think just if there's anybody who's watching who's kind of new or from our various channels and doesn't know the people involved, we're just going to do a quick 1 minute intro for each person, and then just say a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're about. Thomas, I'll let you go first actually because you're the guest.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I have a YouTube channel, and I basically wanted to come onto this discussion today because I want to defend the viewpoint of universal veganism. And I want to make this very clear. My contention is that it's not possible for every single person on planet Earth to be a vegan. I believe that some people must eat meat in order to be healthy. And that's, I believe this from my understanding of the theory of evolution and also from my own personal understanding. But I want to make something clear. I'm not saying that other certain people can't be vegans, or that in fact they obtain optimal health by being a vegan. So that would be my position that I would hold for this debate.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to put links to everybody's channel in the description, so definitely go check out everybody afterward. Logan, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Well, everybody knows who I am already, so I don't need to do that. But basically, my position would be, in regards to what he said, that if you're a starving person, and you have no other means but to hunt for an animal, I have no problem with that. There's obviously other side issues with that, like why the person is in poverty, and that could be, dealt with. And I think veganism can actually, help that by making the food supply for the world larger, because how many resources have to be used for animal agriculture, impacts everybody globally. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. All right. And for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Pal, and I have this channel, Conscientious Omnivore. I have a variety of topics, dealing a lot with veganism, a lot with gardening, and kind of like conscious living. And yeah, like veganism is a big part of that for me. So that's it in a nutshell. As far as the debate goes, I'm definitely going to be kind of arguing that that basically humans aren't really meant to be eating meat. I think we can live off of it, but it's certainly not good for our health. And in fact, I think it's actually detrimental to our health. So that's the side that I'm going to be arguing as well. So, okay, cool. So I think with that, if you kind of want to just maybe start, Thomas, with your idea of why you think that, you mentioned evolution, maybe start from that angle of why you think we need to eat meat.
Okay, yes. Well, my basic principle is this. If you take a group of human beings, let's suppose that they have mixed dietary abilities. So some of them are very good at eating meat and being healthy from that, and some of them are good at eating vegetation and they become healthy from eating vegetable foods. Now let's suppose we take that mixed group of people and we put them in a very harsh climate, a very cold climate, where there's basically, because of the climatic conditions, there are, the environment is basically meat rich and vegetation poor. Now, if you put this group of people in this environment, what I believe will happen is that the people who naturally thrive on meat, they will be in their element. They will have lots of food resources to eat, and they will become very happy and healthy individuals. They'll be very productive members of the tribe, and they will start, people will want to have sex with them. and have children with them. On the other hand, those members of this tribe who need a vegetation diet, they will struggle to find the food resources that they need. And because of this, they will be forced to eat meat. And the point is that they will not be getting their optimal diet, and therefore they will not be as well, they will not be happy, they will not be healthy, they will not be as productive as the meat eaters in the tribe, and therefore they will not reproduce as much. And because of this, over a certain period of time, like tens of thousands of years, there will be a shift in the genetics of the tribe towards meat-eating tendencies. And so my basic belief is that, after a certain amount of time, if a group of people has been living in a cold climate for tens of thousands of years, it's so completely unlikely that after all that time, every single member of that group would be able to thrive on a vegetation diet. At the very least, there has to be some proportion of that group of people who will need to eat some proportion of meat.
Okay. To that, I would say, I don't know how much research you've done on people like the Inuit, but they're kind of like the epitome. So the Inuit Eskimo people are kind of what you would see on the real fringes of, the world, where there's very little vegetation, very cold, months for long portions of the year. And the thing is that it's actually a commonly held belief that they were very, very healthy, eating their traditional diet of lots of like fish and seal and other kinds of meat sources. And the fact is that a lot of this is based on people's assumptions. And I think one of the things that that kind of carries this forward is the Weston A. Price Foundation. That kind of group of people really like to harken back to this kind of idea that it's like this romanticized thing that they were very healthy. But when you actually look into it, most of these kinds of things started from, I think back in like the 70s is what I've read, where some medical like researchers kind of went to study them in their native habitat, and they basically just asserted that they were healthy, but there was no actual underlying physical tests or any kind of like research done on them to see their actual health. And subsequent studies that were performed on them show that they were actually very unhealthy. And they're one of the few indigenous cultures that I know of that actually their health improved when they adopted a more Western diet. So the fact that they actually became more Westernized and their life expectancy went up is a real good indication that what they were eating naturally is not good. And then to the answer that maybe you're thinking of is that, well, maybe it's because they were already too modernized by the time the people went to research them. They've actually have multiple mummies that they've found that are like thousands of years old. So this would definitely be like way before any kind of like Western influence had reached them. And they had really young people that were mummified that they found either frozen or preserved intentionally. And they had very severe atherosclerosis. So they already had like very severe damage to their hearts. And that actually plays out in a number of other cultures throughout the world. So there are mummies from like Egyptian times, there are mummies in like Peru and other places in like South America, where basically it's shown that people have had heart disease going back like thousands of years. So way before any kind of modern like system of like eating, and definitely before like processed foods would have been any kind of where near like where we are now. So I don't know if you're aware of that or have seen any of the things that.
Yes, I mean, do you have, I tried to find the link. I've heard that there were 2 Eskimo mummies found who had this problem with their arteries. Have you got any, but I couldn't track anything down on the, in terms of getting my hands on something which was speaking about that other than I heard it mentioned.
I can try and dig it up. I've seen, I think it was Dr. McDougall did a presentation once where he pulled up the information from a National Geographic story. So I can try and dig that up real quick, but
okay. But can I say a few things on the Eskimo issue? First of all, there seems to that there is a huge divide. There is the kind of the Western Price camp who say Eskimos were healthier in their natural environment. and now if they're, now if they're unhealthy, it's because they eat a Western diet. Then you have the other camp which says Eskimos were always, if Eskimos are unhealthy, it's because of their traditional diet and they need to do a modern diet. So in terms of the research, we might say, people have different interpretations. But what I would say is this: are you really suggesting that for however many years the Eskimos were in the Arctic, which I guess we're talking tens of thousands of years here, or at least thousands of years, are you really saying that they were sort of crawling about on the verge of having a heart attack at all moments, trying to put up the igloo, trying to chase a polar bear?
No,
were they all
not.
sort of on the verge of sort of keeling over and having a heart attack?
No, because it takes decades for that disease to really get you. So it's very possible that they would have died well before the disease would have advanced far enough to actually do them in. And you see that nowadays too. So there's much more recent evidence that you can go to where I think in the US, where they first kind of started looking at this link of how early atherosclerosis starts, was when they did autopsies on young people who were coming back in body bags from the Korean War. So they took, basically people in their 20s, they were killed in combat, and they autopsied them and they checked their arteries. And what they found was that 70-something% of them, and I can send you links to this stuff, 70% of them already had advanced atherosclerotic plaque build up in their arteries. And at the time that people found this, the scientists who did the autopsies, the doctors, they were so shocked by this discovery. They were like, well, these guys are super fit, they're in the military, they're in the prime of life, and they're getting this problem, what's going on? So then they started doing autopsies on children. So really young children. They kept going back younger and younger, basically from people who died from accidents, you could get hit by a car or whatever. And what they found was that the people in the US, eating the standard kind of diet, as young as 8 years old, they already have the first stages of heart disease. It just takes a really long time for this to progress. And they've subsequently shown this with thousands upon thousands of autopsies. So this isn't just a couple of people, and it's been demonstrated across thousands of people.
So you're saying that there could have been Eskimos who are really healthy they basically were healthy.
Yeah.
But you'd have to be more than, let's be clear, they'd have to be more than appear healthy. They'd have to be able to cope with incredibly dangerous conditions, incredibly cold conditions, and they'd have to be very, very vigorous people. So they'd have to chase down animals or run from animals, and they wouldn't be having heart attacks or anything like that. But
that's not how heart attacks work. I mean, you can see really fit people dying from heart attacks just as much as really obese, out of weight diabetic people dying from heart attacks. You don't really have to go farther than just looking at some athletes that there's been a couple of really high profile bodybuilders that have recently died. Obviously what you might argue against that is that they were taking steroids, and that exacerbated any kind of genetic predisposition that they may have had. And I'll grant you that, but again, they have had the atherosclerotic plaques. So just because you're fit and you look healthy from the outside doesn't mean that that's what's going on the inside. And you look at somebody like Bob Harper, who was the the Biggest Loser, one of the trainers. The guy had actually been a vegan, interestingly enough, for some short amount of time, and then he got more and more into CrossFit, and he started eating a paleo diet, really heavy in meat and animal fats, and he suffered a massive heart attack. And you look at somebody like that, the guy's super fit, he looks incredibly healthy, and by all accounts, you would never have thought that his veins are already getting blocked. And again, there is this thing that it takes a long time. So it takes decades for this stuff to build up to the point that it causes enough of a constriction that you can actually suffer the heart attack. Before that, some people do get chest pains. It's called angina, and that can certainly happen in some people, but some people never get the warning signs. They just simply get a fatal heart attack and they drop dead. it's very sudden because that's just the way it works. It takes decades for the things to, you know, constrict enough that it becomes an actual problem.
Can I just say on the
after Thomas makes a point here, sorry, after Thomas makes a point here, could I say something after this about the the studies?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
All right.
Okay, the thing I will say about the Eskimos, I can't believe that they could live in those conditions and not be healthy and have, you know, be vigorous people. I will concede, however, that it might have been evolutionary, it might have been good from an evolutionary point of view that when they reached 60, they had a heart attack, because that would then it would suit the remaining members of the tribe to lose their old people in that fashion. They wouldn't have to look after their elderly, which would not be a hindrance for the remaining members of the tribe. So I will concede that from an evolutionary point of view, Eskimos might be primed to have a heart attack at 60. But the thing is that I don't, if we now moved Eskimos onto a carbohydrate diet, they may not have heart attacks when they're 60, but I would still say that throughout the remainder of their lives, you know, throughout their entire lives, sorry, I'm really not sure they would ever hit any kind of optimal health. So, you know, I just find it very difficult to conceive or to believe that Eskimos could now thrive on some kind of vegan diet. I think they would be very poorly served by that kind of thing.
Okay, I'll give the floor to Logan, and then I'll make a kind of statement to that. Go ahead, Logan.
All right. So, why you see, like, you know, Eskimos and the mummies and all these people getting atherosclerosis, just the clogging on their arteries, just shows in general, like, that is not a food that your body is designed to eat. And I'll give you another example here is the Maasai. If you ever heard of the Maasai, there's a study here that they studied 50 Maasai men's bodies. They autopsied them, and these were all very active people, exceptionally active and fit, and they consumed diets of milk and meat. And they all had advanced atherosclerosis, and it says similar to old US men. So these were people who were just eating, like, you know, the free range type of, you know, meats and milk and things like that. And their arteries were still clogged up. So, like, you can't even, at that point, you can't even blame junk food or anything like that, because that's all their diet consisted of. So when you look at the Inuits, you could say, well, is it the new junk food because they're testing them now when they're eating American diets? Is it that? But this one's very conclusive, and there's a lot of other studies like that. And they're able to survive and be healthy. And what happens when you're eating any sort of harmful thing? Like, human bodies are very durable, so you could look healthy. Like, I could be super healthy, but I could be eating, you know, something horrible, and the toxins just build up in your body. So whether it causes heart disease or cancer or whatever it is, it's going to happen later in life at any moment. And nobody really knows what, like, the exact amount of moderation per person is going to be of what's going to eventually cause a problem. So it's like, if you figure out that this causes heart disease, that's the #1 killer. It's best to avoid that, because, you know, whole plant foods don't cause heart disease. In fact, they prevent heart disease. So that's obviously the better choice.
Okay, well, I will just say a few things to that. I haven't seen that information you have on the Maasai, so I will accept that that is true. I will say, however, you know, when you think back to a lot of the Native American Indians, I don't remember, you know, people like Sitting Bull and these kinds of people, they seem to reach a kind of ripe old age. And there's plenty of incidences of people reaching a good age who lived on very kind of primitive diets. But the second thing I want to say is that atherosclerosis, or however you pronounce it, this is just one metric of health. So it's a very kind of narrow understanding of what health really is to concentrate on a metric like that. And the final thing I want to say is I'd like to ask Logan, can you explain when I gave you that evolutionary example before, can you explain how you end up with a tribe of people perfectly adapted to eat vegan diets?
Okay. So the thing is, Well, let me just mention the atherosclerosis part. That is the main metric for health, because if you look at what people are dying from, the number one cause of death is heart disease. Number two is cancer, but then I think it's like 3 or 4 is stroke. So stroke is also related to clogging of arteries, and one clogs your brain and one clogs your heart, and you die from those. So it's like number 1, number 4, that's like the biggest concern. If you could cut those 2 out, there would be just a tremendous amount of people saved. So that would be the main concern, because you always look at the biggest problem first, and then you would move on to the next issues down the line. So you keep saying vegan diet too. Like veganism, like you got to understand, is not a diet. Like you just cut out basically animal products, and then you're a vegan, and you're doing that. You know, that veganism is more of an ethical thing. Now there's different diets within veganism. So what I would be promoting would be a whole foods, plant-based diet. And if you look at what humans evolved from, 55 million years ago, they evolved from a thing called the ancient monkey. And this was in a tropical area in China. And that animal only ate insects. And then what happened was 55 million years ago in China, it was a tropical area, and there was an ancient monkey. And that evolved into being a frugivorous animal living in tropical areas like in Africa and things like that, along the spectrum of 55 million years up until now, right? So what do frugivorous animals eat? They eat leafy greens and they eat fruits, right? So these are the 2 things that are really healthy for humans. Like there's going to be no problems if you're eating a lot of leafy greens and fruits, right? You're not going to, your arteries aren't going to clog up, and you're going to be pretty healthy. So that is the thing. If you look at the wide spectrum, that is the thing that humans have been eating the longest. And that is why it's extremely healthy for them to eat, fruits and vegetables, raw fruits and raw vegetables. So anything else that came along the line, like if you look at dairy just came along recently, or gluten just came along recently, or, meat was there, but it was like only during starvation. So you'll see monkeys nowadays. Monkeys will rip apart other monkeys and they'll eat meat, but that's only based on survival, right? They don't do it all the time. They're eating fruits and vegetables majority of the time. So your body never adapts to things that you've only done rarely, right? And that's why people get heart disease from eating meat, because it shoots your cholesterol way up. You have the adaptations the same as all the other primates. Over 55 million years, you've adapted the same. Only recently have people started eating the way that they're doing, and that's why they're getting heart disease.
Okay, can I just say, first of all, I totally disagree with this notion that we have to be concerned primarily about heart disease. If I live to 100 and I have a really healthy life, I don't care if I get a heart attack at 100. There is more to life than having there's more to health than whether or not you have a heart attack. And I would have thought you'd have known that as a personal trainer. But the thing I want to say then is that yes, I agree that monkeys and the primates that we originally developed from were, they did eat plant food. But there have been huge changes as humans have developed. And I basically want to ask you this question. Which of the following 5 statements do you disagree with? Statement number 1, that our human ancestors have been in the northern hemisphere for at least 50,000 years. Statement 2, that in those 50,000 years, the climate was very cold to the extent that every year there was a winter. Statement number 3, in a wintry climate.
I'm gonna lose track of all the. I'm gonna lose. You're gonna say too many things. I'm gonna lose track. I might have to address one at a time, right?
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing, the foods that give you a heart attack are also the foods that are gonna reduce your quality of life. So they're interconnected. So when you say that heart disease is only one part of health, if you're eating the foods that give you heart disease, those are also reducing your quality of life in all sorts of other ways too. So it's the same thing really. But
that is a little bit contradictory to what the Omnivore just said before, where he was saying actually you can be healthy, but you're just having a build-up.
Well, what I said was seemingly healthy. So I mean,
Yeah.
you can be fit. You can be like running a marathon.
jacked.
You can be lifting weights, like be really strong. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Okay.
your digestion, when your digestion suffers, that reduces your quality of life like daily.
Absolutely.
Right? Like if you can't go to the washroom and you feel sluggish and you're tired, that effect, you could still do your daily activities, but it's just gonna. And the thing is too about that is like if you've never had optimal health, you think what you're having is optimal health because you've never felt the other way before. You've never tried like a perfect whole foods plant-based diet for a year and felt that. So you think, oh, everything's great, right? You have no idea. But so what you said, the first thing about the climate, though, you said I think people moved, I think it was over 125,000 years ago, people moved from African areas, and then that's when they started migrating. I'm not sure on that, but I think it's 125,000 years ago. But even that, I think it was 60 to 125,000 years ago. They're not really sure exactly where, but if you look at what I said, 55 million years, that's a tiny little dot on the huge spectrum of 55 million years.
That is true, but evolution, it's not like evolution can't act over tens of thousands of years. If I can,
okay.
Yeah. So I
could respond to that if you want.
Okay.
Okay. So if you look at cow's milk, though, is a great example. So people, 75% of the planet is lactose intolerant, which literally 3/4 of the planet gets sick from drinking cow's milk. And so that's been around for what, 10,000 years? So you could tell that adaptation happens very slowly. The other quarter that can handle cow's milk, they're only tolerant. So that doesn't mean optimal. That just means tolerant. That just means that they can handle it without getting sick, but that isn't their optimal food that makes them feel the best.
Okay, well, let me just say something on dairy. I agree that I think dairy has a very recent history of 10,000 years, something like this, which I would therefore put an asterisk against it. I will say, however, as a caveat, that lots of the dairy products that are consumed today are pasteurized, and therefore I'm not convinced that a lot of the people who are said to be lactose intolerant really are. But I think it's a different thing when we're talking about 50,000 years, or as you said, 125,000 years with meat. So let me just run through this 5-point statement, and I want to know which part you disagree with. The first is that humans, or our ancestors, have been in the northern hemisphere for at least 50,000 years. The second is that in those 50,000 years, the climate has always been cold to the extent that there was a winter every year. The third one is that therefore, in a wintry environment, the only real food sources available are meat and fish. The fourth statement is that we can therefore conclude that these ancestors must have eaten meat and fish. And the fifth statement is therefore, as we are the descendants of these people, we must also eat meat and fish.
Can I handle this one, Logan? If I could jump in?
Yeah. You could do this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to address the parts that I disagree with is that because of the winter, that's the only thing that's available, the meat and animals. I actually just did a video about this recently, about like farming and agriculture and what can be done, for people living in northern climates. Much farther back than 10,000 years, or I don't know how far back, but people have been preserving food, and animals do this too. So if you look at squirrels or chipmunks, they will store nuts, they will store grains, whatever they can find in their little cache of food. And people have done this much the same thing. The other thing is that you can have like even very primitive technologies like earthen cellars, no electricity required, all this kind of stuff. Things like grains will store virtually indefinitely as long as you keep them dry. Same thing for not the same thing, but similarly, tubers like potatoes and things like that will store for months at a time. Apples will store for months at a time. Hard fruits, squashes will store for months at a time. I've personally had like a butternut squash that I had like 7 months, and it was fine. I just kept it in the cellar and then ate it. So there's a lot of different ways that people have been preserving food, and this is like way before like canning or modern techniques, because that's only been around for like 150 years or whatever. So certainly I would disagree with that. And also the thing is that a lot of people are kind of hearkening back to this romanticized idea that only the animals are available, but what they're really doing is they're eating a diet that's totally going against that. So the reason why you can eat like meat now in the winter is not because the pig itself would be able to sustain itself on that harsh, winter environment. It's because you've stored grain for it or some other type of feed like corn or soy or whatever that you're then feeding it. So you could have just eaten that yourself. And I'm sure for the purposes of like ancient times, like it would certainly have been easier for people to store the grain or the food themselves, like corn, you can dry that, than it would be to make some kind of like shelter for the animals and or go out and hunt it in the wild, because that also is very calorie, expensive. Like you need to really go out and track something and hunt it and kill it and drag it back. That takes a lot of calories. Whereas if you just had your little cache of food kind of, in an underground little hut or something, you'd be able to just go in there and get the corn and eat it.
I will concede that is a good point, but let me just say a few things. First of all, do you know how long how long humans have been doing that kind of thing for? So that would be my first question. The second thing I would say is that even if they were storing foods that they saved in the summer, I don't see that would rule out them eating meat during the winter. And I do understand what you're saying about the pig, and that the pig might be scarce in winter, but I don't think the same would apply to fish. I think fish would have always been plentiful in the various different water resources.
Some fish will actually hibernate, so I don't know. I mean, I think that could potentially reduce some of their numbers, but yeah, I'm not saying that like the thing we're saying is not that there was some kind of like ancient civilization that was vegan. All I'm saying, and I think Logan would agree, is that people ate far less meat than they do nowadays, and that that's really kind of what our bodies are made for, is to eat like mostly plants. And the fact that you can tolerate some meat is more akin to Logan's example of like if you poured some antifreeze into your morning shake or something, if you put only a few drops, it's not going to kill you. That's kind of like how I think of meat. It's like eating some small amount isn't going to harm you. You're probably not going to get the plaque buildup, and that's like what you've seen in many traditional societies that they've studied. So the Okinawan Japanese, the Isle of Crete off the coast of Greece, these tribes, the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico, these tribes of people all ate like really high percentage of their calories from plant sources. So I think the Okinawans were the highest. They were at 96. The Isle of Crete was 93, and the Tarahumara was something like in the 80s. They ate mostly like beans and corn. So same thing with like places in rural Africa, China. It's basically like the longest lived populations have the lowest consumption of meat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not convinced. I mean, just to say something, that there seems to be this notion these days that meat leads to having a heart attack, or meat leads to obesity, or meat leads to bad health. But I will say that since time immemorial, the only people who were ever capable of eating meat were people who were vigorous enough and strong enough and fast enough and quick enough and healthy enough to be able to catch that meat. So it seems to me that it is inherent to meat eaters. There must be a way in which meat eaters can be some of the most perfect physical specimens on Earth.
Can I address that point there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so when you're like, say you're a person who's trying to survive in nature, right? Like there is an energy output that it takes in order for you to catch an animal, right? So you have to, find an animal and then chase it down, right? And a lot of people have these myths where it's like people would run down animals and when they didn't have weapons and basically tire them out and then eat them. The amount of energy that takes is not equal to the amount of energy that you would get back from that animal. So you would be in an energy deficit. So that would lead you into more of a situation of starving to death than the energy output that it would take to pick a plant and then eat it. On top of that, you also have, depending on what animal it is, the animal could attack you, injure you, hurt you, you know, all these things. And, you know, you get an infection, you get a broken bone, like you're dead. Like what would be the point of that? If you look at your entire anatomy, everything that is part of your anatomy, it is completely the same as another frugivorous animals. Like, you know, your hands picking, you're not on four legs. You're not designed to do that. And it's the same thing, like I said, about the 55 million years. It's the same thing. Like, why would, when you're looking at people ate meat, they ate meat like maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. They're not eating it anywhere near to how people are eating it now. And the point is, nowadays it is completely pointless to even eat the meat. So when you add in ethics and environmental impact on top of that, if there's no point in you doing it, why would you do it?
Okay, can I just answer that? There's 3 points there that I'd like to make before I forget them. I mean, the first thing is you sort of suggest that people chasing down meat are spending more energy than the energy they get from meat. You're basically indicting the entire carnivore kingdom there. There is a reason that carnivores have prospered in evolution, in an evolutionary sense, and it must be because they gain more energy from the meat that they capture than they expend in capturing that meat. And I mean, a prime example of this is Native Americans. Native Americans in their natural habitat were very healthy. I will concede that you're probably right, that maybe in the past people only ate meat on like a weekly basis or even a monthly basis, but that's still giving credence to what I'm saying, which is that some people need to eat some proportion of meat.
Okay, so a carnivore's actual body, though, is designed completely different. So a carnivore is up in a running position at all times when it's awake. It's a lot easier for them to be running faster, and the energy output is greater. And that is why a carnivore sleeps for like 20 hours. If you look at a cat, they'll be sleeping the entire day, resting so they can hunt like crazy for those 4 hours and just go nuts. Like my cats will go berserk on each other, right, for no reason, right? And house cats will just kill things for no reason. And when they do kill an animal, like they could fast for like a day or two, and then they kill an animal, they could fill their entire stomach up, not a house cat, obviously, but like a bigger carnivore with like pounds and pounds and pounds of meat. You wouldn't even be able to fit that amount in your stomach. And that's why humans are foraging animals. They're awake there's a reason why you're awake for like 12 to 14, 16 hours, because that is your foraging time where you would be walking around picking plants and things like that, right? And that's the difference. Like there's tons of differences between an actual carnivore and a human one. But, and also I just want to say about you said about pasteurized milk. Like that's what the Maasai study that I pointed out shows. They weren't drinking pasteurized milk and they still had heart disease.
Okay, well that's fair enough. Have you got the could you?
Yeah, I just
linked
linked it to
the notes.
Yeah, I just linked it to Omnivore on Twitter. I don't know. He could screen share it or send it to you, whatever he wants to do.
Okay, I will look at it if it's put in the comment section after the show. I will.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said something else. I forgot to address your last point there.
Native American Indians. I also said that you were, by admitting that humans ate meat on a monthly basis, you were sort of conceding the point, my general.
No, but like, yeah. So I mean, I agreed at the beginning that humans ate meat rarely based out of survival. So I would eat a bag of chips, right? Like if I was starving and there was nothing around. But that doesn't mean my body's adapted to eating chips, right? That doesn't mean that it's optimal food. So then what I was pointing out is that like you could potentially eat some garbagey food. Like I could even jeopardize my own health and like say, like I got this beer down here, right? This is vegan beer, but I'll jeopardize my own health just for fun to drink this, right? And it's not even based out of survival. But then when ethics and environment come into play, there's no reason for me to stab, if this beer was alive, stab it with a knife, slit its throat, and destroy the environment. So I wouldn't do it, right?
Just to be clear, in the last 50,000 years, I think it's my opinion that humans would have had to have they would have had to have eaten at least some quantities of meat and fish. But in terms of, I guess I'm interested in the kind of the forage, the preservation, the practice of preservation of vegetation during the winter months. If you're really going to crack my argument, I would need to be convinced that humans have been preserving vegetable foods for some amount of time.
I get what you're saying, and Conscious Omnivore kind of mentioned that a little bit, but then I think the idea, like, you're not seeing the bigger picture, like how big 55 million years is of people eating fruits and vegetables compared to even what you said, 50,000 years, 55 million to 50,000. Your body isn't going to change to an omnivore's body because you ate meat during the winter for 50,000 years. That's just a tiny dot on a huge line.
I would say that's like saying that we shouldn't be walking upright because most of our ancestors walked on four legs, or it's like saying we should live in the sea.
Did they? No, I don't think they did.
Most of our ancestors walked on four legs. Yeah.
But we lived in the sea over 55 million years ago, right? I think it's 139 million years ago we lived in the sea. So that's a long time away.
Yeah, and so 55 million years.
I want to bring it back.
Example.
I want to bring it back to the present day for just 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to show the link that about the Maasai. So this is the one that Logan just sent. So I'll put all the links and any links down in the description after. But this was basically the one that he mentioned. The hearts and aorta of 50 Maasai men were collected at autopsy. They were exceptionally fit and active, just like Logan said. The intake of animal fat exceeds that of American men. Measurements of the aorta showed extensive atherosclerosis with lipid infiltration and fibers changed with very few complicated lesions. The coronary arteries showed intimal thickening, so that's not good. Which equaled that of old U.S. men. So that's the study. But what I want to do is just kind of come back to something that Thomas, you've kind of hinted at, that today, like we're talking about today, right? So your point is that somebody who grew up in an area, lived in an area where they were, kind of adapted to eating this more meat-rich diet, it would have been a northern place. If you've seen the movie Forks Over Knives, there's this wonderful scene where they talk about what happened in Norway. So in Norway during World War II, the Nazis came in and they basically confiscated most or all of their livestock animals. So they were basically, left without animals, and they had to live off of their greens, their beans, whatever else they had, fruits and veggies. And there's really interesting, mortality statistics from there. So what you can see here is a chart of mortality from circulatory diseases. So this is heart disease. This is death rate per 10,000 people. You can see that in the 20s, it was, relatively low. They had 24 per 10,000. And then it kind of kept going up and up, as the modern, kind of world kind of kept developing. The Nazis came in, took all their animals. What happened to their heart disease rate? Boom, like drops down. And then what happens after World War II finishes, the hostilities are over, they get their animals back, it starts climbing, and then it's gone up since. Now, this is just, one thing, but there's similar, kind of interesting things where, here, let me show you this. This is actually from Finland, another very northern, kind of area. And what you can see is that in the 70s, they had the highest rate of heart disease in the world. They were the worst in the world. And they turned to the World Health Organization and they started a series of interventions. One of the things they did was they wanted to reduce saturated fat intake, and they had monetary incentives for dairy farmers to switch to berry farming. And they had like prizes from villages, from one village to another, to have like who could lower their cholesterol levels more. And basically 25 years of this, they basically reduced the mean cholesterol levels for the country by 17%. They brought down like really high elevated blood pressure levels. They reduced coronary heart disease deaths among men by 65%. And because that drop is so big, because of what Logan said, that it's the #1 killer, that drop actually reduced the overall all-cause mortality by 45% and increased their life expectancy. So what happened is men got an extra 7 years of life and 6 years of life for women. Now, this is just like a really huge and kind of staggering, idea that you could, extend your life by 7 years. This isn't the case of living to 100 and then dying from a heart attack. This is the difference of living to 60 and dying of a heart attack, or living to 67. That kind of idea. And these are all northern people that we're talking about.
Can I just ask, when you had the Nazi flag about those Norwegian statistics, are you saying that Hitler was right?
Yeah, that's funny. No, but that's a good attempt. But do you get what I'm saying? Okay. That's directly kind of what you're saying, that there's people that are still adapted to it. And what Logan and I are saying is that nobody's really adapted to it. It's just that there are some people who can get away with eating some of it and it won't kill them.
Well, can I just make a point here, which is that the thing I don't trust about all these kind of bits of research data, there's two main problems that I have. The first thing is that they're largely carried out on people who are not healthy in the first place. They're not healthy in the first place because they don't eat like their ancestors. They eat on a Western diet, or they don't exercise like their ancestors. They have stress levels that are different, way higher than their ancestors. They don't sleep properly. And the second thing is that the metrics of health that are used are very they're very specific. They're all about heart disease or heart attacks, this kind of thing, or in that case, cholesterol. Now, let me just say something on the cholesterol thing. Back in 2011, my doctor said that my cholesterol levels were too high. Sorry, my cholesterol levels were too low and that they should be higher. So it's not necessarily a given that lowering your cholesterol is a good thing. And just to give you an example, if you, there might have been Norwegian people in that survey. They may have been, let's suppose their ancestors were big meat eaters, and they in turn were eating meat, but they weren't doing exercise. So if you're doing meat, if you're eating meat and you're not doing exercise, and then you reduce your meat intake, it could well be that your cholesterol levels go down, that you have less risk of a heart attack. But what other changes happened? Because it doesn't seem to me that you controlled for other health factors. So, for example, if you took some of those Norwegian people, they may have changed their diet, but I want to know, did they have, what was their digestive systems like after this change? Were they constipated? Were they bloated? Did they have bad breath? What were their sleeping patterns like? Did they have bags under their eyes? Did they have green stuff coming out of their eyes? Was their skin good? Did they have spots on their faces? Did they have back problems, knee problems? Were they athletic? What was their weight gain or weight loss? What was their mental health like? Were they depressed? There's a whole load of other factors that aren't being controlled and tested in those kind of things. You're picking a very specific metric, and you're working with people who are probably de facto unhealthy in the first place.
Okay, so this
Can I address that for a second?
Go ahead, Logan.
So the one thing you mentioned about exercise and diet, they have had studies where they showed, meat-eating marathon runners had worse arterial health than sedentary vegans who just sat on the couch and did nothing. So studies like that show that exercise is completely overrated when it comes to health. Like what you're putting directly into your body every single day has like a 95%, impact role on your overall health compared to, being active. Obviously being active is important though, right? But I totally agree with you on how studies are completely flawed and they need to be using healthy people. But the healthy people, let's say cholesterol, right? So why there is cholesterol studies that show that cholesterol is good for you is that they're taking meat eaters, people with already high cholesterol from eating eggs and dairy and meat, and then they're giving them more cholesterol, and it doesn't make a difference in their cholesterol. So what happens is if you were a person who just ate raw fruits and vegetables, right, you would just have a normal cholesterol because your body makes all the cholesterol that it needs to make on its own, just like creatine and a whole bunch of other things. And you don't need to add any more into your body. So when your doctor said, you know, like your cholesterol is too low, that, I mean, that doesn't even make sense because you make all the cholesterol you need. Otherwise, me and Conscious Omnivore would be dead because we're not adding any cholesterol into our body, right? So the thing is, like, you have enough cholesterol, and as soon as you add, say, one piece of meat, like a big steak, right? You eat a big steak, that shoots your cholesterol up. So now it's up, and it goes on a curve. So once it's up, it stays up. And if you say the next day, then you ate like a couple eggs, it's not going to move. It's just going to stay up. So what studies will do is they'll say, well, their cholesterol stayed the same, so therefore eggs are good, right? But they didn't take somebody who doesn't consume dietary cholesterol. So that study is completely flawed. So I agree with you, and that happens with tons and tons of studies, but that doesn't help like the argument that meat is good. That actually hurts the argument that meat is good because they are not taking people on whole foods, plant-based diets for these studies.
Okay. I will say when I had that test, I had only been on my meat diet for about a year. So it wasn't like I was a big meat eater at that time of that cholesterol test.
I would like to kind of mention something that's totally anecdotal, so you know you can take it with a grain of salt and throw it away if you want. But like I've considered myself to be, you know, fairly healthy and definitely health conscious and you know, fit and exercising very regularly for about 15 years now. And you know, I had a period of time before that where I was kind of really unfit and I was really heavy. I was about 220 pounds. So that's, you know, maybe 30, 40 pounds of fat over where I am now. So I started from there, and then I, you know, worked my way down, and I started really like running regularly and going to the gym, lifting weights, etc. And the thing is, I had been doing that for years. So, you know, I had run a marathon. I've actually done ultra marathon, like relay races, and the like, all as an omnivore, eating what most people would probably consider to be, you know, a healthy diet. So definitely eating lots of like what I thought were good meats. So lean meats, fish. I was eating lots of eggs. I was drinking lots of raw milk actually, and eating dairy products. But when I say healthy, what I mean by that is that I was always eating lots of fruits and veggies. I mean, I've been eating probably anywhere between like 4 to 6 pieces of fruit a day for, like I said, probably about 15 years now. I've cut out most refined like sugars. I haven't had like cola. I don't drink very much. I don't smoke. So I've been doing this for 15 years, right? And never had a problem, never felt unhealthy. Did all these kinds of, you know, things like the marathon, no problems. But when I adopted a whole food plant-based diet, so I cut out all the animal products altogether, I noticed a dramatic improvement to my health. So one of the things that I've noticed is my eyesight has gotten better. I've done a video about this on my channel. I actually show the, you know, the doctor's prescription and everything like that. My eyesight has actually improved. My recovery after workouts has like insanely like gotten better, like by far. So like this last year in May, I ran an ultra relay race with a buddy of mine. We did it's like a 220 kilometer race where we just run and you know, pass the baton and the next guy goes. So I ran like over 105 kilometers, and I was fine. Like 2 days later, I was out for a jog. That would never have happened. The year before that, we ran it as a 3-man team, the same race, and I was devastated for like a week and a half. So that was before I had been a vegan. Sorry, that was 2 years before that. Sorry, because we skipped a year. So that's like one thing that is very, you know, interesting, that that for me, I've definitely noticed an improvement in performance. And the other thing is that I've noticed a performance improvement in bed too. So I mean, like basically, you know, you mentioned before, like heart attack is not the only, you know, measure of good health, but like, you know, sexual performance definitely is. And this goes back to something that Logan said. I never had a problem. I never had complaints in that department, but I definitely got a lot of compliments after about a year of a whole food plant-based diet. It got better. So this just directly goes to show that like, it doesn't just, you know, I never thought I had any problems, and I was definitely, I haven't gotten any fitter. I haven't been able to get any faster. I haven't run faster, but I recover from it faster and I feel better.
I hate to help your argument, but I've had some very negative feedback about my sexual performances. So maybe I should turn vegan.
Certainly, they say it's the canary in the coal mine, because if you think about it, I mean, it's an artery, right? So like you are getting, plaque. And think back to what I said. People eating standard Western diet, by the age of 8, you're already starting to develop the fatty streaks. It just takes decades to develop.
But can I ask you then? So how long were you actually, there's another question I have, is why do you call yourself Conscientious Omnivore? And also, how long were you an omnivore for before you became a vegan?
Yeah, so I'm going to be turning 40 shortly, and I've been vegan for like 2.5 years. So the whole period of time before that, all as omnivore. Used to ridicule vegetarians, vegans. I really was like super hardcore against like veganism. And the reason why I have that channel name is because it's kind of like a trick, sort of. I kind of want to say that to be truly conscientious, you have to be vegan. So it's kind of like it's a joke. Or like, how people used to be conscientious objectors to like war.
Yeah.
So I'm the conscientious objector to eating like an omnivore diet.
But don't you think you might have already got a lot of your health from being on a meat diet, and then now at a certain age you're able to say, right, well, enough is enough?
No, because I've definitely gotten better. So like I said, like my recovery after workouts is actually better. If I do a heavy squat day, like in the gym, previously when I was eating, meat and other kinds of, animal foods, I could be sore for like 3-4 days. And I mean like really sore, like hurts to walk kind of sore. And now it's like, 2 days later, I'm fine. I'm back in the gym again.
Yeah.
Can I get a point in there too? I want to talk about that too. So I was actually a power lifter for almost 5 years, lifting really heavy weights, like 500-pound deadlifts and stuff like that. And I was eating meat and all that stuff and, tons of it, like stuff in my face. And the idea is just to, lift as much weight as possible. So you're just eating junk food, you're eating meat, you're eating whatever, right? And it was mostly meat, like whey powder and you name it, right? And, I was strong as hell, but you could feel that you weren't healthy. So when it comes to having strength, and workout ability and stuff like that, like I could work out crazy hard for like 2 hours, have tons of energy just from all the calories I'm stuffing in my body. But then like recovery afterwards, like you'd feel like garbage. Like I'd be laying on the couch, I'd be getting big muscles and looking great and everything. But then I just feel like trash afterwards, right? And then I realized that like not only just is running just a healthier sport because you're not having to stuff your face, but then like the diet shift, like what he was talking about recovery, it's because your body's like more alkaline, right? So it's more when you're eating inflammatory foods, which is what animal products are, they inflame your muscles even more, right? And then they stay hurt longer. So when you have anti-inflammatory foods like plants, you recover way faster because they're more alkaline instead of acidic, right? And there's more science too, like what you're saying about like testosterone. Like vegans have been shown on average to have higher testosterone than meat eaters. That has a lot to do with the amount of hormones that you're getting in the animal products that you're eating, like the estrogens and everything like that, throws your hormones out of whack. And then fiber also is responsible for removing excess hormones. So when you don't have a ton of fiber, all those estrogens stay in your body. And then vegans, even though they consume less protein, they have higher plasma protein levels in their blood. So they're eating the right amount of protein with anti-inflammatory foods, and then there's more protein in their blood, so that makes it better for exercise too. They have a healthier BMI. They've been shown to live longer, all sorts of things, right? So one of the things in your original video you were saying about like how it's more manly to eat meat. So I just wanted to bring those things up because, just based off of erectile dysfunction and stuff like that, like obviously, veganism is the way to go to be manly.
Well, I will tell you about my own personal story then, but let me just make one point about, I want to make something clear. When I say we should eat meat, I mean we should eat meat which is completely organic and natural, and not stuffed with, vaccines and hormones and a load of chemicals. So let me just mention that here. But can I just ask you then, Logan, when did you start to become a vegan? And how long were you a power lifter for on a meat diet? and then on a vegan diet.
Yes. What happened? Yeah. Well, I mean, I just want to say too, like even grass-fed meat has hormones, right? Because you're eating an animal that contains hormones. They're just added hormones
Right,
when
but then
when you eat other ones, right? So they just add steroids or whatever. But so yeah, what was the question again? Oh yeah, so I was a power lifter for like I've been going to the gym like 10 years or whatever, right? And I was
What
doing a
age?
little bit of running here and there, and I've been a vegan for about 2.5 years. So I still eat, some junk food and stuff like that here and there. It's over the 2.5 years, it's gotten more and more healthy and more plant-based and whole foods plant-based. I mean, and what happened at first was I was still a power lifter for the first year or so. Even when I went vegetarian first, so maybe a year and a half. I was transitioning, more and more to a whole foods plant-based diet. And what happened was I have videos, up on my Facebook of, the days and everything of what I was doing, of lifting and everything. And I was like super strong still, but what happens is I start losing fat. So when you go vegan, like you lose a lot of visceral fat, like around your organs and stuff like that, and then you lose, vegans on average lose about 10 pounds, I think it is, in the first month or something when they go vegan. So I did start losing body fat, but like I just looked way better. So like you could see the definition in my muscles and everything. It's like the expression, like you can't flex fat. Like I was strong as hell because like mass moves mass, right? But like you couldn't see my muscles, so you could see them afterwards, which I was super pleased with. And I was still strong, but then I just, after a while, I realized that powerlifting in general is a steroids man sport, right? You have to be on some sort of, drugs to excel in the sport. And I was just kind of bored just doing it for myself. And just to set a new goal, I decided to go into like marathon running, and now I'm doing ultra running. And so I shifted my goals, and then now I've been trying to lose weight. So obviously muscle has been coming off because I've lost like 40 pounds. So I just intentionally have been eating less and trying to run faster. I might get back into powerlifting, but I've done both on a vegan diet.
Okay. Well, but can I just be clear, that was about 8 years you did powerlifting on a meat diet and then 2 on a vegan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or about 1.5 on a vegan diet, yeah.
Okay. My story is quite different. I was a vegetarian when I was from 17 until 22. So for 4.5 years, I was a vegetarian. And at the end of that time, I was very skinny. I was very gaunt. People always used to say that I looked like a ghost. I looked a bit like a giraffe. I didn't sleep well. I was often moody and depressed. And it really just was totally damaging to my health. Now, after that, I then started to eat some meat. But even then, I was eating things like, white chicken, and I was keeping my meat intake very, very low because I thought that red meat was bad for you. And then at the age of, I guess, 29, so this was about 7 years later, that was when I first got into, I had a lot of health problems when I was 29, and I got into the idea of trying a high-fat diet. And that is the diet that I've been on for the last 9 years, and it consists of two portions of red meat a day and one of cheese. And I couldn't have been healthier. I couldn't be more healthy than I am now. I put on an awful lot of muscle mass. I feel strong. I feel sated. I don't feel depressed. I don't feel tired and weak. I sleep well at night, and I don't feel tense and anxious and nervous. I mean, one of the things is when you deprive a hunter of meat, their natural tendency is to get really angry and aggressive, and to basically want to kill someone. And that's nature's way of telling you to go out and kill an animal in order to have the meat. So for me, all I can say is it's been the complete contrary, because I started out as a vegetarian, then I shifted to a very low intake of meat. And then finally I've been on a high meat diet, and I really couldn't feel better.
I would definitely ask you, like, if you've done any blood work, like, I mean, you don't have to share your numbers, but Like I know, like my cholesterol basically got cut in half after about a year of being on a whole foods, plant-based diet. And like I said, it definitely translated to better performance in bed and better recovery. So, like for sure, I mean, in my mind, it definitely reaffirms this idea that I'm removing the plaque from my arteries. And that is kind of one of the main touting points of a vegan diet, is that it's the only diet that's ever been shown to reverse heart disease. So there's been no other diet that's ever been proven to like unclog your arteries. And then I would just say that, like, if you don't know what your numbers are, I would definitely encourage you to look them up. If your total cholesterol is over 150, you pretty much have the makings of the plaque building up. So if your total cholesterol is over 150, which for most people eating a standard diet it is, I used to be at like 180 or even a little over 180, which is considered healthy by most people, but they don't realize that that's directly contributing to the buildup of the plaque. And now, I've dropped down to, like, I think it's 107 the last time I had it checked. So, my LDL got cut in half. It's pretty amazing. So.
Well, I honestly don't know what my cholesterol levels are, but I've always had, this was before I started the meat diet, I always had things like heart palpitations, which have gone away in recent years. And more than that, when I was a vegetarian, I had blackouts and this kind of thing. And what I'm saying is, without having to use the metric of what's my cholesterol levels, I just know that in so many different ways, in terms of my appearance, in terms of how I feel, I'm feeling much better on this meat diet. Having said that, I do think I'm very much, I've always been interested in reducing my meat intake, because I think 2 times a day is very, very strong, and I'm hoping to reduce that. But my metabolism is incredibly fast. And for example, last year I got food poisoning and I couldn't stomach anything. And in 5 weeks I lost 5 kilograms. And to be honest, if I went on a vegan diet, or even just a vegetarian diet where I was allowed to eat cheese or eggs, I think I would lose about 1 kilogram every week. And once I'd be doing that for 15 weeks, I'd be getting into very dangerous territory.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just the fact that you're losing weight, I would say, is a surefire sign that you weren't eating enough. And that can certainly make you cranky and be like, miserable. So, I mean, one thing that you might have is what a lot of people that I've talked to experience when they think of starting a vegan diet, is that they're afraid of carbohydrates because of all the kind of paleo and Atkins and every kind of, else, all this information that's out there. So people are afraid of eating carbohydrates, but some of your best friends are like things like sweet potatoes or, potatoes. Those are like relatively dense foods that have, good amounts of calories. Same thing with like grains or beans or legumes. You can have like healthy fats like nuts and avocados and stuff like that. A handful of nuts goes a long way and provides a good amount of calories, stuff like that. So for sure you weren't eating enough, like without even knowing any of the specifics, but just the fact that you're losing weight, like for sure you're not eating enough.
I really, that just does not chime with my experience. And what I would say is, first of all, I always used to love eating carbohydrate food, and I hated eating meat. And when I was told about the meat diet, when I was advised to go on that, I had to kind of change my perceptions. Because I used to hate steaks, for example. Didn't have any taste for them, but I used to love stuffing myself in carbohydrates. So when I made the change to my meat-based diet, it wasn't like I'm just going to eat meat. It was like, do I really have to? What I'd say, I don't think that is true. When I lost those 5 kilograms in 5 weeks, I was still eating plenty of stuff. And the idea that a sweet potato could make up for a proper, let's say, a steak, it's just not true. The sweet potato I will eat it, and within about half an hour I'll feel absolutely starving, mad, angry, irritable, all this kind of thing. And
yeah, but that's fine. Like what I mean by, and don't take it the wrong way, like what I mean by fine is that, well, you either didn't have enough of them or you didn't put enough other high calorie things with it. You can eat like some healthy fats to go with it. That would certainly go a long way to making it last longer, and or you just may not realize the volume that you need to be eating, so you might still be under eating. You just have to eat more.
Well, the thing about things like nuts is that they're not fatty enough to really satiate my hunger. I really couldn't. I would love to live off a diet of nuts, but they go through my system too quickly. So even that's a problem. And I mean, just you mentioned other things like legumes. I don't digest legumes whatsoever. I'd love to be able to eat them, but I can't digest them. There's clearly some kind of problem with digestion of legumes. And most grains, including, well, absolutely everything which has got gluten in, but also things like quinoa, buckwheat, and then things like potato and oats. All of these things, they're not, when I put them into my body, I don't have a great reaction. And if I was to try and be a vegan, I would I'd have very limited diet. Fruit and vegetables, certainly. Seeds and nuts, yes. But after that, and certain grains, I think if my ancestry was really adapted to being a vegan, I would have a much better relationship with grains and legumes.
Mm-hmm. Can I address that? So, I mean, if you were, like you said, you're a vegetarian a long time ago.
Yes.
So my sister was too a long time ago, and there wasn't like the internet out back then, and people didn't really have a full spectrum of information that they have now. So if you were a vegetarian, right, you probably were lacking in B12, because what they do is they supplement the animal products in animal agriculture with B12. So when you're eating meat, B12 is a bacteria that people should be getting, but everything's sterile right nowadays. They wash everything thoroughly and filter your tap water, everything like that. You don't get it, so they put it in the animal products that you're having, right? So as soon as you switch back to animal products, you were getting your B12, right? And were you supplementing with it when you were on a vegetarian diet? Because that over time that'll affect your energy levels a lot.
I certainly wasn't supplementing with it, but I did used to eat Marmite, which I think I think Marmite's got B12 in it, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, so you would probably need way more than like Marmite or whatever, right? So you need about like, I think it's like 2,500 milligrams per week or something like that. So you just take a quick dissolved supplement and you eat it, right? And it's really easy. But if you weren't doing that, over the years, your energy levels might have decreased. And then as soon as you added meat back in your diet, which had the B12, you could have, and then also vitamin D. If you weren't getting vitamin D from the sun and things like that, you're basically eating the animal's vitamin D and things like that. So it does take like a tiny bit of research, like before you just say like, I'm going to go vegan or vegetarian, right? Just to make sure that you're getting these things. But then what we've been saying so far, right, is really anecdotal, and that's what Conscious Omnivore started this off as saying is I have an anecdotal story, and then we kind of just all been telling anecdotal stories. Like in these debates, like really, like when it comes down to the science, like you'd have to point out what is actually in meat that you can't get from plants, because you can get everything from plants. You just have to eat the plant. So like for you to say I need meat, you kind of actually have to point out why you need meat.
Well, I would first of all say I'm not an expert on what is in meat, but I don't buy this idea that you can get all the different things from plants that you can get in meat. That's the first thing I would say. But let's just suppose that you can. The point is, I believe that the human alimentary canal is designed to take, it's designed to eat meat rather than plants. In the same way, you can't just take a pill and hope that it pops through the alimentary canal and gives you everything you wanted. Our bodies are very much designed to intake a certain type of thing. So, for example, when you eat meat and you chew that triggers a whole load of different systems, and that's different to when you chew plant food. And that triggers a whole load of different systems. So, but my ultimate thing is, if you want to get back to the science, I need an evolutionary answer to this, to what I was saying before. And although I agree that the idea that humans might have salvaged vegetation from the summer and kept it through the winter is something of a little dent in my argument, I still believe the evolutionary science is completely on my side. And that if you okay.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of already like said that you're right in regards to humans ate meat occasionally, and they ate meat, sometimes in the, more often in northern climates like Inuits and things like that, they had health problems from it. Like, so I'm agreeing that they ate meat. Like, in say, like I live in Canada, right? Super cold up here. I know people eat meat up here, and like in the winter, the further you go, there's probably more and more people eating meat just because of transportation to get stuff up there is expensive too and things like that. But like, I don't get how that changes your entire anatomy though, because of that short amount of time. Like I see what you're saying, but millions of years is longer than thousands of years.
But that doesn't really hold, because that's like saying we should live in the water, because for millions of years our ancestors lived in the water.
Yeah. So we could go back. The thing is, we can go back and forth on this and all day, and you say I don't agree or whatever, this and that, and that's what I was saying. At is like you have to point out something that we're missing, that your body needs. Like, just by saying, well, you chewing the meat is better, I could just say, well, 90% of choking deaths come from meat. So just by chewing meat, like, it shows that you're not even designed to eat meat if everybody's choking and dying from it. Like, you need to point out a specific thing that you're lacking.
Well, listen, I believe there's some scientist out there who could tell you why it is that, what it is in meat that is better than something in vegetables or in plant food. But I'm not that guy, and I don't pretend to be that guy. But what I do know is that the theory of evolution is it's an incredibly powerful tool which can tell you something. It's a wonderful heuristic for giving you a great indication on something. And if for 50,000 years my human ancestors were eating meat and fish, I know a priori that they became adapted to eat meat and fish, and therefore I'm adapted to eat meat and fish.
So I could say that the exact same anecdotal story, though, that you just mentioned, right? So this is how the human body works on a short-term adaptation. So you've been eating animal products for a long time now, right? So what happens is your gut flora is an environment, right? Just like the world's an environment. And your gut flora adapts to whatever food that you've been eating. So if you've been eating meat for, majority of all this time, and then all of a sudden you try to shift to these grains and potatoes and things like that, and legumes, you said mess up your stomach. That's the exact same thing. And you know why? Is because your body is now has a short-term adaptation to these other foods that you were eating. And it takes a year for your gut flora to turn back to a healthy gut flora and now adjust back to the foods that you should have been eating. So if you were to go on a vegan diet, you'll have problems with digestion for at least a year, right? And that's the same thing with evolution, is that the longer you've been doing something, the more you're adjusted to it as a species. So the longer you've been eating whole plant foods, that means you should be eating the whole plant foods and not, you just adjusted quickly to cow's milk or eggs or meat or whatever, right? Now that people are eating that all the time, they're not adjusted to it. Just like your body's not adjusted to the plants.
Well, there's two. I have to raise. We must be clear here. When I'm talking about my human ancestors adapted or adjusted, I mean they adjusted over like thousands of years in an evolutionary sense. And when you're talking about me adjusting, that's me as an individual. So I just wanted to point that out. But the thing that you're forgetting is that up until the age of 29, I was brought up on a carbohydrate diet. That was my main source of food. So actually, all of my body was adapted to eating carbohydrates. So I don't buy this argument that it would be a huge surprise for my body to not get meat and to just go to a vegetation diet. My body knew that for 29 years.
I would like to say something here. If you look at people who kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, because these are, I think, people that you would agree, Thomas, are adapted to eating plants. So people like the Okinawans, the Tarahumara, the people, in Greece, whatever. If you just take one of those examples, you look at the people on the Isle of Crete. They had en masse significantly lower rates of heart disease and cancer deaths than the people on mainland Greece. This was back in the 50s. they commissioned a study to find out what the heck they were eating, because they're genetically pretty much the same people as the Greece, mainland people, but they just had way better health rates. So what they did was they went and they studied them, and what they found was that the majority of the people on the island, they were eating a very plant-heavy diet. They had 93% of their calories coming from plants, with the exception of a few small number of people on the island who were very wealthy. They were eating meat like pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Those people had pretty much the same exact heart disease and cancer rates as the people on the mainland. And those are all people living in the same place. They're living on a freaking island. Same thing with the Okinawans. Like if you take them back in the I think it was the 50s, it was right after World War II, when basically the U.S. had a base there. They did a survey to find out why these people are so long-lived. They had extremely low levels of animal product intake. They had 96% of their calories from plants. And the thing is that in subsequent years, they actually have really, really poor health compared to the mainland, the rest of Japan, the bigger islands, because they started eating more meat. And now they actually eat a really heavy meat-based diet. So this would go in line with what you're saying, I think, that they're adapted to eat plants and they're doing the wrong thing because they're eating more meat, so they're unhealthy. So if we're in agreement there, all I'm saying is that you take the people that you think are adapted to eating meat, like the people in the north, like I said, the Norwegians or the Finnish, and they're eating lots of meat. You remove the meat by force, because in the case of the Nazis, they just took it from them, and they get less heart disease rate, and they get less deaths by thing. So that's not a survey, that's not an opinion. It's like they had fewer people dying. So it's exactly the thing that you're saying. And it proves that nobody is really adapted to it. Going back to Logan's points earlier about carnivores versus herbivores, they have different physiology. So they have shorter intestinal tracts. They have the ability to eat like really large percentages of their body weight in meat, versus herbivores. They can't do that. There's a whole bunch of other kind of adaptations that animals have made. And that's actually another thing that, we can ask you if you know of any adaptations that humans have made to actually eat meat. They have adaptations to eat plants. So one of the things is that your tongue can taste sweetness. That's actually sugar. So like that's specifically an adaptation, so that when you go and you eat berries and fruit, that you can know that that's good for you because it's sweet. To my understanding and to my knowledge and all the reading that I've done, there's no such adaptation for like detecting protein or any kind of like thing in meat that you can detect on your tongue, for example. And then just one more adaptation, which I was going to say, but now I've forgotten. Crap. Anyway, I'll stop there and let you reply. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it was. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, listen, can I just reiterate? I don't want to get into an argument about this, but my problem with the Norwegian research is that you didn't know that the people beforehand were, you didn't know that they were healthy, and second of all, the metric of health that was used upon them was narrow. But I just want to say that I don't want to get into a contretemps again with that. The thing about the adaptational stuff, though, well, look, I know if you eat a berry, you get a little buzz out of it. Because it tastes sweet. But by the same token, if you smell a barbecue on a summer's day, you're like, oh, I could really fancy that meat. Something starts going in you. You start salivating at the idea of eating a sausage or a burger or a steak. So I would say that the smell of meat to a human being, especially when it's cooking, I think that is very much an adaptation that we have that shows we're adapted to eat meat.
I would argue that that's social conditioning, and I can say this from my personal experience. Like, I would absolutely have agreed with you. I mean, I used to be big into like barbecues, and I was a huge meat eater, cooking up ribs and steaks and everything. And now when I smell that stuff, it actually kind of makes me sick. Like it really, like I'm certain that that's like a learned kind of like triggering. It's something that you get used to.
Well, all I'd say is that we know that meat's been in the environment, at least of my ancestors, for so many years. I would find that peculiar if that was a kind of learned behavior, because that's something which has always been there. And to me, it seems like a very natural, instinctive behavior. I think another
If you want to go
adaptation
back
is
farther though, like, would you feel the same way if it were raw? Like, have you ever been to like a pig slaughter or something else? Have you seen an animal getting killed? Have you smelled blood?
I haven't quite seen an animal being killed, but I love the smell of a butcher's. I'm like, oh, I love a butcher's.
That's
And I
because
love,
everything's smoked and it smells really good.
well,
The thing is, I have been to a pig slaughter, and I can tell you, it turns your stomach. I mean, I've killed smaller animals like geese and ducks and stuff like that, and rabbits, and it's never pleasant. So I mean, if you actually go to like see an actual slaughter, it's horrific, and it certainly does not make you hungry. So I would say like that. I mean, if you don't believe me, like literally, just go to a slaughterhouse or to a small scale kind of thing, like a farm. Don't even go to the slaughterhouse, because then you can say that, well, that's because it's mechanized.
yeah, well, I've never seen an animal slaughtered. I have worked in a factory farm before, but I didn't actually see the slaughtering going on. What I would say to that is, again, fish. If I go to the fish quay when there's fresh fish brought out, I'm just like, oh wow, that smells great. There's something just instinctive about that kind of thing, in my opinion.
I could give you an example of how you're more adapted to plants than meat and hunting meat just based off your vision. So if you were a hunting animal, right? Omnivores and carnivores, they see on a grayscale. And the reason why you see on a grayscale is because that you can track movement, and you could actually see detail way better on a grayscale. And that's why they use grayscale pictures to look at the inside of people's bodies, the x-rays. Like doctors will look at it on a grayscale because you could see more detail. Now you have an adaptation to seeing a full spectrum of colors for a reason. That's a frugivore's adaptation, so you could see all the bright fruits and vegetables and find those easier, because that is the thing that you need to find, and you don't need to hunt animals, and that's why you don't see in black and white.
I would agree that when we're not adapted to be carnivores, so I agree that we have certain adaptations that make us, I think that could be disputed, because you could argue that humans, because we've invented tools and kind of cognitive abilities for a while, I'm sure you could argue that we don't necessarily need black and white vision, and that there are benefits in having color vision, like being able to spot fruit. So I don't.
Well, you need to see the animal though, right? Like, even if you had the tool, you would need to see the animal running for you to go get it, and the detail, and having a tool doesn't change your anatomy, right? Your body would have to change. Like, the tool doesn't mean anything.
No, once you get, I don't really understand the argument, because even though we have color vision, we can still see animals moving about.
No. So I mean, you would still need to see like everything, like in order to survive. Like all animals need to see everything in order, so you don't get killed. You could find your house. You could do all sorts of things. Like, you need to see everything, especially to protect yourself, right? And that's one of the reasons why there was tools. I mean, I could go into the whole thing about why there's tools, but like, a lot of it could be protection from other humans. I would argue that cooking your meat was only to change it because people are disgusted by meat. If you find hair in your soup, you're disgusted by it. You're like, oh, there's a hair in my soup, right? If you were a meat eater, you would be like, yes, there's a hair in my soup, but add some feathers and bones and stuff in here. Make it, like that. If you're like a real meat eater, you wouldn't have to cook the meat to alter it in order for it to be edible, and then cover it in spices and oils, which are made from plants, in order for it to taste better.
I would be all for eating. Well, I look, I don't know about raw meat, but if you could give me some organic meat, like was really totally fresh, like our ancestors eat, I might be tempted to eat it. I certainly, when I have a steak, I have it raw in the middle. So I'm not one that needs to cook meat like that.
I remembered my other adaptation that I wanted to mention, if I could jump in for a second.
Yes.
It's basically the ability to produce vitamin C. So humans actually lost the ability. Apparently, they theorized that we used to be able to produce our own vitamin C, but because we were eating so many plants that contained vitamin C, we lost the ability to do it. So this actually is another kind of physical adaptation that we've made. Carnivores don't need to consume vitamin C, but people do, because we don't have that ability anymore. So that's another thing. And then the last thing I would say about the adaptations is this, that if you take any animal that is a known herbivore, so like a rabbit or something else like that, and you take it into a laboratory environment and you feed it saturated fat and cholesterol, you can actually induce heart disease in that animal because you're feeding it a diet that it's not supposed to eat. And basically only herbivores get this phenomenon. So if you take a dog, a lion, a cat, anything that's like a bear even, which is a true omnivore, because they eat plants, they eat berries, and they eat all sorts of other stuff too, you cannot give them heart disease, no matter how much meat, saturated fat and cholesterol you're feeding them. But if you do this to a rabbit, I don't know, whatever, a deer or something else, you can actually make it get heart disease. So if the fact that people are getting heart disease, and it's been shown that the only people who pretty much don't get heart disease are people with like cholesterol levels below 150, and the only people who in average have cholesterol levels that low are vegans. I mean, and people living like these truly traditional kind of, low meat diet, kind of like hunter-gatherer people, that really kind of says something.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that point. Is it the animals, which are the animals that develop the heart attacks or the cholesterol?
It basically plant eaters, so herbivores. So if you take a rabbit, which is meant to eat just like plants, and you start feeding it saturated fat and cholesterol, it will get heart disease. There's no herbivore that eats its natural diet. So if it's just left to eat plants, they won't get heart disease.
Well,
it only occurs when you start feeding them saturated fat and cholesterol.
I would say that's a very negative way to make the point, because I think, first of all, that's quite obvious that if you feed herbivores meat, they're going to run into trouble.
Well, and that's exactly what I'm saying. So why do people get heart disease?
Because they don't always get heart disease. Not everyone who eats a meat diet gets heart disease. A Native American,
well, I would say,
that wasn't choking, having a heart attack.
I'll send you the links that show the autopsies on literally like tens and thousands of children, and going from the age of 8 all the way up to like in their 30s, and virtually 100% of kids by the age of 8 eating the standard American diet have heart disease. They have the first stages, so they have the fatty streaks forming.
Eating the standard American diet, yeah. So what that doesn't prove, that proves that people who are unhealthy are unhealthy. No, I mean,
okay, but,
no, but where does it come from though? Like, what is giving them the heart disease? You know what I mean?
Not doing enough exercise, eating too much refined sugar, refined carbohydrates, having ridiculous stress levels, not going to bed on time.
Yeah, so being sedentary doesn't put plaque on your arteries, and also carbohydrates will not put plaque on your arteries either. So, I mean, that might give you a glucose spike or something like that, right? Which, there's other issues with that, but it's not going to put plaque on your arteries. What puts plaque on your arteries? Also oil, right? Oil is just refined fat. So obviously oil is bad for you. And you could have trans fats and it calcifies your arteries, but other than that, it's just animal products.
Okay. Well, listen, I don't know exactly what causes plaque, but I just can't take studies like that seriously, because all those kids would have been brought up on a diet of complete junk food. Can I just to go back to the adaptation thing then?
Yeah, sure.
What would you say about the teeth? I think they're called incisors, which have, they're knife-like in order to...
So what I would say to that is that there's a really funny vegan channel called Foot Soldier, and he really recently did a hilarious video where he played in the clip of Joey Carbstrong on one of these TV shows, and the guy said this exact thing, like, what about the canines? And he put this together in like some crazy techno music, and there's a scene where a guy is trying to eat a rabbit with his teeth, and I'm not talking about like it's already been skinned and it's raw. I'm saying the thing is a dead rabbit fur and all, and he's trying to like rip through the fur, and he can't do it. You can't even break the skin on you. I mean, you can barely even just rip the fur out of the animal, and he's just struggling with it for minutes and minutes on end. To Logan's point, without tools, you pretty much wouldn't even be able to eat the raw meat. And I've seen so many people on YouTube doing these ridiculous like raw meat diets where they're saying like, oh look, it's so easy to eat raw meat. Well, yeah, it's easy to eat raw meat that's already been sliced nicely, and it's a nice tenderized piece of meat. But like, rip through the skin of an animal, like the leathery hide. I mean, it's not for nothing that we use their skin for shoes and for like things that are really durable, because it's freaking tough as hell. Like you can't even tear through that. Those teeth are not made for ripping flesh. They're made for like biting into fruit and stuff like.
If I could address that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been researching like the whole evolution and adaptation thing like a lot lately, and like your whole, not just those certain teeth, but your whole jaw pattern, everything about it is frugivorous. So if you just look at starting in the back and to the front, it's flat all the way around it, which is just like tiny little, the smallest little point, right? So the whole jaw structure is flat, and what's that? That's for grinding plants. So if you look at a carnivore's mouth or an omnivore, they just go flat up and down like that, right? They don't go side to side. Your mouth goes side to side for grinding the plant foods, right? Also, the opening of it is very small. Like you could fit like an apple, banana, something that would fit in your hand perfectly. You can't fit an animal. Like if you look at an alligator or any of these, animals that eat meat, their jaws are going like this, and they're stuffing the whole animal, and they're like snakes and whatever, right? And just devouring these animals whole, and then having the whole animal sit in their stomach. Also, like I mentioned about choking, your tongue is just completely different. It's not as rough as a cat's tongue. Also, the way that they lick up water, completely different than how you would suck water through your mouth. There's more things. I just can't remember them off the top of my head, but there's at least like over 10 things that point to you are not a meat eater just in your mouth.
Okay. Well, listen, on the incisors point, I would say that I would be interested to know what rough and ready primitive humans, if I had lived all my life in the wild, I would suspect that I could probably rip open a rabbit with my teeth. But let me just concede that point. I just think that Conscientious Omnivore, when you made that point about how humans had tools, aren't tools really evidence that humans are, I wouldn't say adapted to eat meat, but are capable of eating meat? Isn't the fact that we've had tools for eons and eons and eons and eons, isn't that evidence that maybe the tools have been doing the work of butchering the animals?
I mean, I'm certain that people have used them. And to Logan's point, I think it's far more likely that they use tools to catch and kill animals than chase them down, like running wise. But my point is just that it's not good for us. It's not something we're adapted to do. It's more along the lines of, I think, I don't remember which doctor has said this before, but one of the vegan doctors has said it's like you have a car and it's made to run on one particular, either diesel or benzene, it doesn't matter, one variety of fuel, and it runs its optimal best when it's getting that fuel. But if you're like going along, and this is going back to like this evolutionary idea, if you're living in rough times and you don't know when your next meal might be, you come across like some meat, even though it's not your optimal fuel, eating that versus you don't know when the next meal you might get is going to come along, of course you're going to eat it. It's not the optimal fuel. Your engine might be a little bit kind of banging around because you put diesel in the gas, or vice versa, but it'll get you to the next gas station. It'll get you to that next meal, and it won't kill you right away. So I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it, is that like we for sure have been eating meat for a long time, like you say, but I think the amount is kind of where we disagree. That I think it was just in really like rare occasions, and it was probably just enough to not really kill people. Plus, we don't really know how long people lived, so there is a lot of kind of debate about how long people lived, but it's generally agreed upon though that like people in the Paleolithic era lived less than they do now. So it's very likely that they wouldn't have encountered those decades long processes to build up the plaque.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about health also for a long time here too. Like you're saying like you're not sure about like what nutrients you're missing and stuff like that. So we can't really discuss that. But like, what about like just the entire planet, like environment wise? Obviously, animal agriculture is destroying the entire planet. So what do you think like the whole world should be eating?
I don't. Well, I would just dispute that. If animal agriculture is destroying the planet, then that's because A, they're doing it in a really stupid fashion and using, I don't know, crap. But it's B, because we have an expanding population. So I don't think if maybe the solution is to kill off, some of the human population, then I don't
Okay, I
necessarily
mean
see that.
that is an issue, right? Overpopulation is definitely an issue, but
Yeah.
that's like a different issue, right? It's not. It's like obviously, you could look at what has the biggest carbon footprint out of any amount of people, right? A big carbon footprint is obviously worse than a small carbon footprint, right? So yeah, obviously, like I mean, if you talk to vegans, they would be like overpopulation is an issue. Maybe we should think about ways to bring that down. But then you still need to worry about pollution, water usage, species extinction, rainforest destruction, ocean dead zones, all that type of stuff. Those are all big
I
deals.
Well, in my ideal model, we would farm in a way which was similar to what our ancestors did. I certainly wouldn't be for destroying the rainforest. Can you give me a list of all the ways in which we destroy the environment via animal farming?
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, you have to plow down rainforest in order to have land for like the crops, the farms, like you name it, right? You need to have land. Like I think it's like 85% of the grains and the crops go to feed and animals and animal agriculture. So all of these plants are going to feed animals. And they're killing indigenous people by destroying their land too. I think it's like an acre every 2 seconds gets plowed down, and that's the leading cause of species extinction and a whole bunch of things, right? Water usage, like there's just a giant list of things. Greenhouse gases is a big one. The cow burps and farts. But the thing is, like what you said about going back to the old days, right? So there is too many people for you to go back to the old days. So that's why they have the animals confined in those CAFO animal agriculture buildings, is because they need to do that. Otherwise, it's way too much land usage, because then they just have to take all those animals and spread them out and then have these huge pastures for all these cows and chickens and stuff. So that causes way more destruction of plowing down things to spread the animals out. So there's a statistic that shows you'd have to plow down half of the world in order to feed America on a grass-fed diet. So that's why they have to do the confined animals thing.
Well, that's interesting, and I agree that is a problem. Like I say, for me, I don't think to say that the conclusion. If you're going to conclude that we should stop animal farming, I think equally valid. You can make the conclusion stop. Just get rid of lots of the human population. I think there's an intimate relationship between, man and the animals that he eats, and so. Yeah. That's the way I'd see it. But the other thing I'd say is that I think at some point in the future they should be able to make meat in like a lab, which is I think that they're in those stages now. So I don't think that's far away.
And so it's kind of like a two wrongs make a right argument, though, right? If you say, well, overpopulation is bad and animal agriculture is bad, then I don't need to worry about animal agriculture because overpopulation is also bad.
It's kind of precise. It's like saying, how can I give you a metaphor? It's like saying, the problem is that maybe man has exceeded his biological reach, so I don't think it's an intrinsically a problem of animal farming. I think it's a problem of overpopulation. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. But you can't go back though, right? So you're like, oh, we have all these people now. So what do we do about it now? It's like, well, we can't just go machine gun them all and blow them all up. I mean, you could, but that's going to be morally wrong. So what should you do? The best route is obviously change your diet to a more ethical and environmentally friendly one, and then worry about depopulation, like everybody can only have one kid or something.
I disagree with that. I think you could easily make the argument go out and kill lots of people. But if
Thomas, I think earlier you're joking about Hitler, and now you're joking about this. I think you're not going to win many friends in this debate. But
I don't see. For me, animal foods are intimately related to health. So I don't see there's any point in having people alive if they're not going to be able to eat animals. But it's like saying that there's other things that we need to do. I mean, I'm struggling to find my argument here. I don't.
Well, that's kind of a weird statement you just made. People shouldn't be alive if they don't eat animals.
No, well, I didn't mean that. I guess what I'm saying is it's like saying there's too many arms on the planet. There's too many arms, so if everybody chops off an arm, the world will be a better place. There are too many arms on the planet, but that's because there's too many people in the planet. But I need my arm, and I need the animals that I eat. That's my argument.
I would like to comment on this. So one thing is there are a lot of people who suggest that we could easily feed the people we have now with no problem if everybody was vegan. So there's just horrible inefficiency in the animal agriculture industry. And just think about it like this, Thomas. If you have even just like a chicken, if you just get the little thing, it hatches, and then you start feeding it. You got to feed that thing for like weeks, months, and it's eating food that whole time. Then you go and you kill it, and you end up with whatever, a couple pounds of meat. You look at the total number of calories versus the calories that it consumed to get to that size. You would be better off like eating the calories. And it's usually, I mean, there are varying, figures that I've seen, but it's anywhere between 4 and 6 or sometimes more times efficient to eat the plant sources. So if you just took what Logan said, which is that, the corn, the soy, all these other grains that are being fed to animals, and you just simply ate those, you can actually, it's shown that you could feed, up to like anywhere between 10 and 12 billion people on Earth if everybody was vegan. So the fact is that it's not even an overpopulation problem just yet. It probably will be at some point, but not just yet. And the last thing I want to point out about this animal agriculture thing that you said, which is to go back to the old days, I want to actually share something with you, and I'll send the link as well at the end. But take a look at this. During the month of February, there was a lady called Dr. Jude Capper. She was a big proponent of dairy. And this is actually research that she published back in 2009. They compared environmental impact of dairy production from 1944, which is kind of like the good old days, compared to modern 2007. And what they showed was that the modern designs were actually far, far less impactful to the environment. So you can see here in the summary, modern dairy practices require considerably fewer resources than dairying in 1944. 21% of the animals, 23% of the foodstuffs, 35% of the water, 10% of the land to produce the same amount of milk. The waste outputs were similarly reduced, 24% of the manure, 43% of the methane, and 56% of the nitrous oxide. So all in all, they're saying that the carbon footprint was 37% of the milk production in 1944. Now, this is just one example, but this directly shows that this is not vegan propaganda. This is literally somebody in the industry who's basically showing you the stats, and they go into this. This is a very thorough report. I would recommend reading through this. You're going to see that that basically there is no good answer to farming this much meat, this much animal products for this many people. You just simply can't do it. The factory farming is the only way that they've even been able to produce as much as they do now with the impact that they have. Going back to the old days is just going to make it even worse. People have to cut back on their consumption. And your point directly about like going back, like I have, kind of a unique history. I grew up in the U.S., but I'm living in Hungary. And basically I was actually born in Romania. I have family still here in Romania, in Hungary. I still have access to like really old people that were living here. they were eating way less meat. So, I talk to people that I work with here, people that are, like just living here. You ask any one of them, people from like my parents' generation, they were quote unquote lucky if they got to eat meat like once a week. Really, like most people were not eating meat more than once a week, sometimes like once every other week. They just simply didn't have the money. They were poor.
That on that issue, that yes, that's like 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or
Yeah.
This is like within the last century. It's certainly true that in the last 500 years, our ancestors probably haven't eaten a lot of meat, but I would say that's because of industrialization and lack of ability to, they didn't have. Well, I mean, you tell me, were your ancestors in the countryside?
Yeah, but I mean, pretty much, this is my point though. Like in Hungarian traditional society, people loved eating meat. It was definitely like a delicacy. They ate it whenever they could. They just didn't
Right.
have the ability to eat it more often than they did. And if you read, I'll link the study about the Isle of Crete, which is the one that I've mentioned before that they did in the 50s. When they surveyed those people what their favorite food was and what they would eat more of if they could, all of them said meat. They all loved meat. They all loved eating it, and they wished they could eat more of it. And the point is, though, that even there, the people who were wealthy enough to actually eat it every day, they were the ones getting sick. So it's like, it's the perfect example of like people wanting something that is actually really bad for them because they don't know any better.
I'm
Like
not sure I'd agree with that, but because if the rich people were eating meat, and again it comes back to this thing that if this research was carried out within recent time, I would have to doubt it, because rich people could have been eating a whole load of other shitty things.
Well, that's the example of the mummies, though. Like, so the mummies were the rich ones, right? They ate the meat and they had heart disease. The slaves didn't eat the meat and they didn't have heart disease.
And do you have this conclusive proof about the mummies and the heart disease?
I don't have it on me, but I could look for it later and tweet it or something. But
all right. Well, if you could put it in the comment section.
Yeah,
I looked
either
at
of
this
you,
stuff on
if you have
mummies.
any of these links, just send them to me and I'll put them in the description of the video afterward too.
yeah, I think it's called The History of Atherosclerosis or something, or like something, however many thousand years history of atherosclerosis or something. There's this study. But I mean, obviously those aren't like, perfect, because you can't jump 4,000 years ago, right? So which is kind of like, that's what I was talking about like nowadays you could look at specific nutrients and be like, you have to point out a nutrient that you can't get because you could easily find that in a plant, right? And that trumps like, oh, maybe this happened, 10,000 years ago. Like that's like, it's not as precise as point to a nutrient.
Okay, then if you let me research, I can find you an answer to that question. If you just let me.
So, yeah. So while you're researching that too, another point I just like to bring up is too, like, you're not going to be missing anything on a vegan diet, which makes it great. But the greatest part of the vegan diet is that you're not getting all the bad things. So you're not getting dietary cholesterol, saturated fats, heme iron, carnitine, heavy metals, toxins, casomorphine. Like, you go down the list, there's like 450 drugs pumped into animal products, right? So there's a serious amount of harmful things in animal products. And if it's completely unnecessary to eat those, then what is the point, right?
Sure. I'm just busy looking for this, but what I would say is I don't believe that it is unnecessary to eat those things.
Yeah.
Let me just find this.
I'll let Conscious Omnivore reply to this, because I think he just made a video on deficiencies, so he probably has it fresh in his head.
Yeah, so I think, the thing is, there's a lot of things that people will say you'll get deficient in if you're not careful on a vegan diet, but most of them are actually quite ridiculous. So people will worry about like calcium or zinc or, other things like that. And the fact is that, this is not what we see. If somebody's eating like a really poorly planned diet of any kind, certainly you can get sick and certainly you can get some kind of deficiencies. But you have to look at just kind of large scale information that's out there. And there are close to 9 million people a year dying from heart disease worldwide. It's the leading killer. And when you look at, like, you know, people having deficiencies, that's not even anywhere close to, you know, being on any one of those lists. So not even in the top 15, not even in probably the top 30. What we have in the modern world is not illnesses that are caused by deficiency. They're illnesses caused by excess. They're the excess and overconsumption of things that are harmful to us, like saturated fat and cholesterol. And one other thing that Logan kind of briefly mentioned just now about the heavy metals and like toxins that build up. I'll put another link in here. There is information that shows that 95% of the persistent organic compounds that enter into people's body comes through dietary fats. So specifically like dairy, cheese, animal fats, that accounts for 95% of the persistent organic compounds that you're ingesting. If you just cut that out, you've already like taken out, you know, the vast majority of the toxins you're getting. And the reason for that is bioaccumulation. So if you think about like, you know, an animal like a cow or a pig or whatever, think of how much, you know, grain, feed, corn, whatever it has to eat. And then you're basically eating that. So you would have to literally eat like tons of, you know, whatever that plant was that they ate to, you know, to basically get that same amount of poison. It would take you, you know, quite a lot of time. And the higher up the food chain you go, the worse that gets. So if you actually look at people like the Inuit, they are actually some of the most polluted people like on the face of the earth, because they're eating things that are really high up in the food chain, things from the sea and from the ocean. So they're eating big animals that consume a lot of fish, things that consume a lot of other animals. And they are actually told to not breastfeed their children, for example. There is a phenomenon that the oceans are so polluted now that basically if you look at animals like porpoises and what are they called, dolphins, a lot of times now I think it's like 40%, some, don't quote me on the percentage, but some large percentage of their first offspring die. And the reason why is that when you have toxins in your body as a mom, you really only have like, you know, two ways for that toxin to go through, like, and exit your body. One of them is through the breast milk, and the other one is through like the umbilical cord while the baby's forming in the womb. And this is just like a naturally, you know, occurring thing because the oceans are so polluted now. And so what happens is that you know, they will give birth, and, you know, like I said, some large percentage of the firstborn child will actually die. Then when they become pregnant again, the next one has a better chance because the mother has that much less toxins built up in the blood and in their body that they pass on to the kid. And this has been shown to be the case with these persistent organic compounds in humans as well. So things like the bisphenol A, the BPA, that, you know, there's like a lot of talk about getting rid of those, and there's plastic cups and all this kind of stuff. These things have been shown to be like multi-generational impacts and mess up hormones and like reproductive capabilities even within people. And what happens is this same phenomenon is seen in the Inuit. They're literally told to not breastfeed their kid because they're passing on so many toxins. So even, you know, I mean, and obviously that's a problem of the modern world because we've, you know, polluted the oceans so much. But what I'm saying is that you could at least stop the majority of that pollution coming into your body by simply not eating the animal fats.
Well, see, there I have to take issue with. The problem is the poisoned waters. That's the problem.
I agree, but what I'm saying is that it's compounded by the bioaccumulation. So the more animal products you eat, there's just nothing you can do about that right now. But I mean, you can go make a new world somewhere and not have pollution in it. Like there's nothing else you can do short of that.
Well, at the present time, no, but that doesn't prove that Inuits are unhealthy for eating meat. That shows that they're unhealthy for eating poison meat. And again,
I agree. I mean, I agree with that. That's why they're told not to breastfeed their kids now. But what I'm saying is what I said earlier, that even if it was a perfectly clean earth and there was no pollution to worry about, you are still getting the atherosclerotic plaque built up because of the saturated fat and the cholesterol.
Well, okay, we'll dispute that. But you mentioned dairy products as well. But again, all dairy products these days are full of crap and it's pasteurized. So, all of this, it's kind of like it's sort of like a get out clause. You're right that these people are eating things which are bad for them, but it's not inherently because they're meat or because necessarily it's dairy. Although I'll say I'm agnostic on dairy. I don't know.
Okay, but will you concede then,
dairy,
though, that in this earth that we live in, because they are so polluted, that it is something that should be avoided?
Well, but if you avoid it, if an Inuit deviates from the natural diet, then I think they'll be losing out. The best way is to try and find a cure to the pollution problem somehow or other.
Okay, Logan, you were going to say something too.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah, I'm not sure if you mentioned the dioxin. Is that what you were talking about in the dairy products? That, yeah.
Well, I was just talking about like persistent organic compounds in general, like just any kind of like dioxins, the BPA, all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of this stuff can be just used. You could just use common sense. Like you don't even have to look at adaptation or anything, right? Like you could just look at a monkey and be like, oh, what do they eat? I look like exactly like them, right? I look like every other thing more than the other animals out there and just go based off that. That would be very easy. But then you could also just look at like, say, dairy products in general. What animals out there even drink dairy after infancy? None. And then also you're drinking it from a different species. How would you think that would be normal food? Also, you look at chickens like laying eggs. Chickens in nature only lay eggs like 10 a year. You wouldn't be following around a chicken for an entire year waiting for them to drop an egg for you and then be like, oh, one egg, finally. And then you ate that one egg and then your body is somehow now adapted to eating chicken eggs. These things aren't part of your natural adapted diet.
I agree, and that's why I said I'm agnostic on dairy. I think those kind of things like dairy and eggs have been in the diet for 10,000 years in the quantities that we eat them now. So I don't know, is that enough time for evolution to work its magic? I don't know, I'll take a pass on that, but I don't think you can make the same argument with meat, which I think has been in the diet a lot longer.
Okay, guys, I mean, we've hit 2 hours now, and we're kind of circling back to the first point. So I think what we should try to do is I'll just ask real quick, does somebody have something that they really wanted to talk about that they missed?
Oh, you go ahead first.
Please.
Okay, Logan, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, what it really comes down to, like, if this is like a legitimate debate, like if you can't point out that vegans are unhealthier on average, or somebody on a whole foods plant-based diet is unhealthier on average, or has more deficiencies on average, or there's tons of nutrients missing, then it comes down to environment and ethics. And if you can't point out that a animal agriculture diet is more sustainable from the planet, then that's a big loss in that area as well. And then on top of that, if you're just needlessly stabbing an animal, that's another loss there.
Okay. Well, like I say, I made on the planetary issue. I think the problem is, you can say there's too many hands in the world, or too many arms, or too many necks, but the underlying problem is there's too many humans. Can I just move on to one final thing, which I want to ask you guys about, because this concerns something which it's similar to something which I've said to the alt-right. The alt-right basically want white ethno-states. And what I've said to the alt-right is the vast majority of the public are on your side when it comes to stopping immigration, but they're not going to be on your side when it comes to having white ethno-states and deporting people. And what I've said to the alt-right is, by taking up an extreme position, all you're doing is you're supporting the status quo, because the people in the center ground who are maybe, let's say, against immigration, when they see the alt-right talking about ethno-states, they freak out. And I think something similar with veganism, because I think the vast majority of people are very much against factory farming. But when they see the vegan element out there who are very radical and who are also against factory farming, but who also insist that we stop eating animals full stop. I think what happens is that the public at large gets they just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, and the issue goes away. So my question to you vegans is, don't you think that by taking up an extreme position on not eating animals, you're sort of maintaining the status quo? And if you just concentrated on trying to stop the horrors of sort of factory farming, that might be more achievable if you took up a less extreme position.
I'm happy to answer that.
Sure.
Take a stab at it. And yeah. So I think to that, I would say this, that in previous parts of society's history, when there's been what has been, viewed by some, sometimes a minority, as a wrong, an injustice being done, they didn't make effective change by doing like a welfarist kind of approach. So when we were talking about people enslaving, other humans, you're basically saying like, well, let's not call for abolition of slavery. Let's like treat the slaves nicer. Let's make sure they get 1 day a week off. Let's make sure, you only beat them a little bit. You only take away their kids and sell them after they're a certain age, or, it's that kind of thing. We see it as an injustice, and we do see it as being unnecessary. And when you see something that is being done unnecessarily, there isn't any way to basically make it okay by arguing that the chickens should be kept in a bigger cage, or that, whatever, how do you kill the animal? Like, question to you, do you think that there's a nice way to kill an animal that doesn't want to die?
No, but I think there's a natural way to do it. If an animal is allowed to run around for most of its life and then is killed swiftly, I think that's a lot better than keeping it in a cage or putting it down a production line. And then, I don't know, I've seen these chicks that get kind of...
Yeah, the maceration for the babies.
Yeah. I think it's better. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you, but as we've said before, unfortunately, with the demand, it's just not possible. So you just cannot get away without doing these mass factory, farmed kind of solutions.
Okay.
And that's also an appeal to nature. So you can't just say, well, in nature, animals get killed. And then, I could say, well, in nature, humans get killed. So I'll give a human a good life and then stab them, because that's what happens in nature, right?
I had an answer prepared for this, but I don't know whether you want to hear it. I mean...
Sure.
Shoot.
Okay, let me just... So what was I going to say? Well, the thing is that if people say if you're going to kill animals, then, and that's because that's what happens in nature, then you kill humans. But what I'd say to that is, first of all, I think I would kill a human, and I think you would kill a human as well if a human attacked you and you had to defend yourself. So
chickens aren't attacking you, though.
Well,
so it's different.
No, but that doesn't... I'm trying to justify. How can I come back to that? Yeah, but I need the chicken for food. That's why I'm going to kill the chicken.
Well, I need a human for food.
Well, then kill the human. I mean.
Yeah, but see, this is the classic desert island scenario. Like, I don't think any vegan would really fault you for like catching a fish because you're stuck on the island. There's nothing else, and blah blah blah. Like, I mean, that's not what we're talking about. Like, you're not on a desert island. You can go into the grocery store, and nowadays it's getting easier and easier. You can pick up a burger made from a cow, and you can pick up a burger made from plants, and the technology is getting better and better, where the taste isn't even really that much of a differentiator anymore. More and more people are getting more options available to them. So it's just literally you're just choosing, this hand is murdering and killing an animal, and this hand is picking up some plants. Like, that's the choice.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the other thing I want to say about killing the human beings is that I think if our ancestors did kill human beings, I think that was a very rare occurrence, whereas I believe that eating meat was a daily or weekly occurrence. And the other thing,
so do you eat insects though? Do you eat insects purposefully?
I don't know, but I might. Okay. I wouldn't.
So you should be eating more. if that's the argument, let's do what our ancestors did. Our ancestors ate insects all the time for millions and millions and millions of years, way more than they were eating meat. So you should be
Yeah.
eating plates of insects and termites.
I will do. They're just not readily available. But sure, if they start producing them that I can eat them, then absolutely I'll do that.
All right, guys. I think I think we should try to wrap this up. Maybe like I'll give a quick round, and everybody does like a maybe 2-minute summary, 2-3 minute summary of their points, and then we'll wrap it.
Okay, well, can I just say I'm going to put in a link in the description which will tell you what is in meat, which isn't in animal food. I can't quite put my finger on it now, but there was somebody called Dr. Kelly who cured his wife of cancer by feeding her on a red meat diet. He found that red meat contained something that wasn't in plant food. So I'll put that in the description below. But just to conclude, I believe that my evolutionary arguments, by and large, are true, and I still, until I'm convinced of the mechanism by which it became possible for humans to thrive on a vegan diet, I will always maintain that the theory of evolution basically will maintain that at least some of us have to eat some amount of food. All that said, I will concede that your argument on humans caching certain vegetable foods during the winter and eating them during the winter and keeping them in a cache, I will accept that that is a flaw in my argument. I will also accept that the stuff on the Maasai is something I'll look into, and maybe that is true that they developed heart attacks even though they ate diets of fresh organic milk and meat. And the other thing I will say is that I do concede the point that if whilst I do believe that humans have to eat meat, I do agree that it's problematic if the only form of farming that is possible is factory farming in order to supply the numbers that we need.
Okay, cool. Logan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so you can about the study you mentioned there, like you can cure cancer on like sometimes, not all the time, on things like ketogenic diets and things like that. They have been shown to cure cancer in some cases. A lot of it is calorie restricting, and there's other factors that go into it. The thing is, you got to look at is what caused the cancer. Why do they got cancer to begin with? It's not from whole plant foods. They didn't get cancer from eating fruits and vegetables, right? So it's like that's probably what they should be looking at is how the person got cancer. You can cure cancer like with a ketogenic diet and things like this sometimes, but then you'll get other problems that go along with the meat, and ketogenic diets aren't sustainable long term. So you got to look at what is sustainable for a lifetime for a person to be optimally healthy through their whole life. The other thing you said, about Inuits. We talked about Inuits lots. I have lots of studies on Inuits. One of the reasons why Inuits didn't have massive amounts of heart attacks, which they should have, is they were drinking a lot of this red wine all the time too as well. There's studies that show when you drink red wine and even like beer on a regular basis, you can prevent things like Alzheimer's, which happens from arteries getting clogged and blood vessels going to your brain and stuff like that, because the alcohol actually thins the blood. So if you're eating a heavy meat-based diet, you can almost get around it by becoming a half-assed alcoholic. But that's also going to be damaging to your body as well in different areas, right? All in all, the whole debate, though, it was nice. And the main points is like basically like if you can't point out at vegans are less healthy, then the more ethical, environmentally friendly position is to go vegan. That's all there is.
Cool. All right, thanks, Logan. My summary is just this, that I actually can definitely relate to Thomas, to your point on kind of looking to nature and looking to kind of evolution and what have you. But my answer is that in all the studies that I've done, in all the reading I've done, I think it is natural to actually be eating, the more whole plant foods, the better. So what I see is that we are physically adapted to eat plants. We're not really good at digesting meat. I don't think it's good for our health. It's certainly not necessary, that's for sure. And once you get to the point where you just realize that it's unnecessary, then it really is an ethical question of, are you killing something just because you like the taste and convenience and all the other reasons that people tend to eat meat. So that's my summary. I think we are adapted to eat plants, and it is more natural. And the last thing I'll just say is that if you have an apple tree growing in your yard, the tree just gives the apples to you willingly. It just drops them to the ground and you just eat them. You crap out the seeds somewhere else. You're actually helping the environment. You're helping it spread, and you're not harming the environment or the plant. With the other case, you are having inherently to harm another living being that feels pain and basically wants to live and be with its family and friends. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay, well, that's good, and I want to thank you for having a reasoned debate. It wasn't very. I thought it might be stressful, and we might be haranguing each other, but it was good that we had a gentlemanly debate.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad too. I think
Thanks
it was
for coming on.
Yeah.
Okay. Cheers, Logan, and thanks,
Cool.
Conscientious.
Cheers. See you later.
Omnivore. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Bye bye.
And thanks to everybody in the chat too. See you guys.